I initially recorded a video as a follow-up to the one I did, but now I have to redo it because of stupid shit. I'm gonna get the negative out of the way this time, because I think this will be better. There's somebody on my video who keeps commenting that I was mindless, and is kind of harping on that, even though I'm kind of telling them that no, I wasn't being mindless, I was just being myself, and I wasn't, you know, negating it anyway, and they're getting kind of pissy and saying, oh, you're not a bomb export. And then he started making fun of my grammar and all that shit. Yeah, I was kind of teasing about the bomb export thing because it was that bad of a spelling error. My grammatical things are minor comparatively. And I admit I don't have good grammar, so yeah, you know, I'm not going to say I have great grammar. My grammar's always sucked. And, you know, I do try at least to spell check. And, you know, they were kind of saying how sensitive I was, and I kind of said pot, meat, kettle, because I kind of told them that they were off about it. This person is known as Black Adder. You can see them in the comment section being a douche, and one of their comments is actually marked as spam. The only reason I'm replying to them is because they keep getting angrier and angrier, and it's really fucking pathetic that they're getting this mad. They could just walk away. I'm not going to block them because they're not being terribly trollish, you know. I mean, I have a sense of proportion. And they're saying, oh, I never said you were a horrible person because I said, you know, oh, you think I'm such a horrible person. First of all, it technically was hyperbole. I was, you know, being a smartass. Because, to be perfectly honest, you're acting like a little child. You are! Second of all, for someone who's saying I shouldn't have public videos, how many do you have? At least I can kind of handle it comparatively. In fact, I've had people say in stories I write where I'm trying to be a sleep-deprived person that, you know, I shouldn't be swearing. And I've asked why, and nobody ever answers me on that. And I actually did ask you, you know, why is it wrong that I said it could have been worse? And as for me being an explosives expert, not to look up what a pressure cooker bomb is, I'm not even sure if that's a type of bomb, because the articles I've read so far haven't really told me, so I don't know what type of bomb it fucking was. So, first of all, no, I'm not a bomb expert, but I do know that if you put enough people in an area with any kind of bomb, you can have more than 3 casualties, or you can have less than 3. You can have 0, if you're really, really lucky. You can't predict what an explosion's going to do. I think any bomb expert would tell you that. Second of all, you're insisting on nitpicking on this one little thing that bothers you, and you're not you gave me a 9/11 analogy. It's like, oh, it's like saying 9/11's not that bad because only 5 planes flew into the building instead of 15 or something stupid like that. That's one, a horrible analogy, and 2, that proves you're not thinking yourself. First of all, 9/11 was a nightmare spawned from the deepest depths of hell by Satan, along with the Holocaust and everything Stalin did and everything Justin Bieber has ever written, for those who don't like Justin Bieber, and I don't know what his music's actually like, so please cross that one out. But you get the idea! 9/11 was a hell of a lot worse than this. You have no right to fucking pull that shit. And that was disgusting, I'll be perfectly honest. That was just disgusting what you did with that. And you're calling me a horrible person because I'm grateful only 3 people died, as opposed to 20. You do realize this was taking place during the Boston Marathon! Lots of people crouched together in the street watching a race. Yeah! You know what happens when there's an explosion of any kind with a bunch of people scrunched into a little space? Bad things! Why do you think I said that? You're not taking into account other pieces of the situation. As for me being sensitive, no. I'm not being sensitive. If I was being sensitive, your ass would have been blocked! The fact I'm willing to have any form of dialogue with you proves that I'm willing to listen, or at least read your viewpoints, and I have been reading them. As for nitpicking my grammar, the spelling thing was kind of like, it was just so blatantly bad I had to point it out and what it actually sounded like to me, and I even told you, I'm taking it as my sign out. So when I end this video, I'm going to be calling myself a bomb export. So in a way, you've contributed to my videos, which is probably counterintuitive to what you wanted. Second of all, you seem to be assuming I'm mindless and daft and stupid. That is what you're assuming, and you're wrong. You're not subscribed to me. I think you're really doing this just to pick a fight. And that's sad. I've looked at your videos and, well, your profile. I actually do. If somebody's, like, starting to get little trolls, I do check their profile to see, you know, what they're like. You give me a very trollish vibe. You're very smartassy. You're very sarcastic. You do things to deliberately piss people off. And I'm sorry, but you're a pathetic human being if that is your MO. And I even asked you, and hopefully you will answer in the comments, if you watch the video all the way through. The reason I want to know this is more because I want to know if you know the rest of my viewpoint. You obviously watched to 3 minutes if you knew about that, because you couldn't have skipped to 3:35 to hear that. Did you listen to the rest of the video, or did you just stop after that, comment, and leave? Because if it's the second one, then you're a rather sad person, because if you'd listened to the rest of it, you would have gotten a better idea of what I was saying. And you would have gotten a better understanding of how I felt about the situation, but again, and I even told you, no one's forcing you to watch these videos. If you don't like it, go watch something else. Really, that's all you have to do. You know, I don't have to respond to you, but I'm actually having fun seeing what you're going to say next. You're actually entertaining to me in a weird way. Part of me is pissed off at you, but part of me thinks you're the funniest thing ever because you're just so adorable. How cute! It thinks it's people is what I'm thinking right now. So yeah, you're not exactly that significant to me, you're just entertaining, and I know they say don't feed the trolls, but there are times where, if they're not particularly nasty, and I don't really get, like, the really nasty, stupid-ass trolls, where, you know, I do like to fuck with them a little bit, because it's funny, and, you know, honestly, some trolls just deserve to be trolled. I'm not saying you're actually a troll. You may actually be serious about this. It's just, you came off trollish, so I won't call you a troll. Although I do think you really do think I'm a horrible person, because the way you're reacting to me is kind of implying it. Like, I'm not allowed hyperbole, by the way. And yeah, I did call you out on the 9/11 thing, because I really think you were out of line with that, but I didn't initially because I was hoping you'd go somewhere with it, and you never did. You kind of just kept harping on me. You know, how dare I reply to you, essentially, is what you're saying. You know, how dare I say, no, this is what I'm trying to tell you I'm thinking. And I hope we don't end up in a loop. If we do, then I may have to block you as a timeout, and then unblock you, like, in a couple of weeks. I may institute that. And it'll give me a chance to explain something about myself, and then I'll get into an update about what's going on with it, and my theories on it, and all that shit, what's going on with the bombings, by the way. This might actually give you a bit more of a perspective. And other viewers, too, just to give you an idea. I come from a very Irish family. I know this sounds very stereotypical, but I come from an Irish family. And I don't know about most Irish families, but mine in particular has a very strong sense of gallows humor. If you don't know what that is, basically it's a morbid sense of humor. It's not something like joking about raping someone. That's too fucking far. That's just like, fuck you, what the hell. You know, there is a thing is too far for us, and it's pretty far across the line, but when you cross it, you fucking cross it, and we let you know. But joking about something like this, or finding the bright side to something like this, if joking doesn't feel that appropriate, is something we do. It's an instinctive thing. It helps us cope with it. Some people cope by crying. We try to cope by joking. I cope by both sometimes. It's easier for me to do this with big things. Smaller things do tend to get me more into like an upset mode, and I'll explain that too, because it's not totally relevant, but it might give you an idea into my psyche. Here's the thing. I'm going to tell you 4 stories. They happened in this order. My grandmother's death, my grandfather's death, 9/11, my mother's death. The order is important. It'll give you a timeline of what's going on. We'll start with my grandmother's death, obviously. It's the first one I said. My grandmother was suffering from dementia. She was suffering from diabetes. She did not take good care of herself, unfortunately. When I look back on it, that is the obvious thing. Was in a nursing home, and she was basically losing it. When she died, it was in a strange way a relief. Now, my grandmother was the initial matriarch of the family. I have officially decided that we are a matriarchal system. We'll figure this out why in a minute. She was the initial matriarch of the family, but she was losing it. And when she passed, it was a solemn moment, because it was the matriarch of the family, and she could joke around, but she was that cute little old granny joker, the serious granny, not the body granny or anything like that. She wasn't Blanche Devereaux. She was closer to like a less naive Rose Nyland. So it was that kind of humor. I think it's been a long time. My grandmother died when I was in high school, so she died. And the occasion was very somber, but it wasn't sad. We were talking about memories and telling some jokes, talking about her thinking she was naked in a Sears window when she had dementia, or my dad thought my dad was the steward on a cruise ship and she was asking for cocktails, which we kind of found funny. I mean, a lot of people say, oh my god, she had dementia, that poor thing, how can you laugh at that? Because it was fucking bizarre. That's how we could laugh. It was like, what? It was sad, but the humor in it kept us from literally breaking down because it was that bizarre to us. We saw the surrealness of the serious situation. Including my grandfather, including my mother, including my father, including me. Like, hell, when she got moved to the nursing home, we had to take in 2 of her cats. One of them was a bitchy little calico named Murphy. And my mom said we'd have to take care of her for the rest of her life. You can kind of see where this is going. The cat was female too, if you know anything about calicos. I went, who, grandmas or the cats? Yeah. That was my first reaction to grandma's going to the nursing home and we're getting her cats. Not, oh my god, grandma's going to be in a nursing home, or oh dear god, I'm going to have to visit the nursing home after creep outness, which, yeah, it did creep me out. But I gotta take the bitchy cat. That's where my priority was at the time. Not because I'm insensitive or thoughtless. It was when I was in high school. And 2, that cat was fucking nasty. Well, she became my friend toward the end of her life, the cat's life. And she outlived my grandmother and outlived my grandfather, actually. Jesus Christ, that cat was a vampire. Anyway, back to the stories, and I apologize for that, but it's giving you an idea of how I think, which might help clarify it, and I don't think I could put it into the comments, because the comments are way too limited, so I'm doing it this way. The second one was my grandfather dying. My grandmother had lived with us, and I have plenty of stories about him. Oh boy, I may make an entire video on that. My grandfather was the sitcom character in my life. He was the one where I sat there going, where the fuck is the laugh track half the time? Because to be perfectly honest, the situations he and my mother and myself all got into were an R-rated sitcom. There's a reason I say R-rated, and there's a reason I'm not telling these stories now, because some of them are a little on the offensive side. No, the N-word is not used, but a few others are. My mother, was driven to insanity by this person, as was I. You'd think having your grandfather in the house would be awesome, especially when he always gives you dollar bills and sweets and all kinds of cool crap, which he did. But he was annoying at times. But it was still sad when he died. But at the same time, it was relief, because we didn't have that particular burden on us anymore. We didn't have to get Meals on Wheels anymore. We didn't have to get a maid service anymore. We had this freed up apartment. And on top of that, the wake was a little more jolly. We don't have funerals, we have wakes. And we have a dinner after the funeral and all that stuff. The funeral was... The wake was a bit more jolly, a bit more rambunctious. And even when we went out to dinner, we were telling stories, we were cracking jokes. One person joked, I knocked on the casket to see if he would give me my $5 that he owed me for a bet years ago. No ill will, no anger, just these crazy ass stories about a man from Queens who was a firefighter, who had a family, and who caused trouble. And that was my grandfather. And then 9/11 hit. A year after my grandfather died. Like, literally this happened, like, these three events happened a year within each other. My grandmother died, then my grandfather died a year later, and then 9/11 happened. I saw 9/11, random shit happened because, random shit always happens. I was just starting my second year in college. We see the events. We do, like, the usual stuff. Then we start talking about it. Well, the first thing I did is I turned on Cartoon Network when I got home. Mom looked at me and she didn't say I'm being insensitive. She didn't say I'm not taking it seriously. She said, good idea, don't think about anything serious. That was how we coped. If we couldn't find humor right away, and we couldn't find a bright side right away, we would just do something to get our minds off it, because otherwise we'd break down completely. Because, that half of the clan is a strong, hearty, powerful clan, but it's an emotional clan. Saying that, our next instinct, we realized that the people that were working at the firehouse my grandfather used to work at were all killed. My mother sighed with relief. Many of those men were at my grandfather's funeral. If my grandfather had still been alive, he would have either had died right there on the spot of a broken heart, or he probably would have tried. And he was not a healthy man. He couldn't walk very well. He had a heart condition. He all the old people problems. He had all the problems except diabetes. That was my grandmother. But he had a sound mind. But he would have tried to get up and help them. He would try to go into the city and help. This was an old, weakened man. Yeah, that would have been one hell of a fight for my mother, because he was also a stubborn man. So in a way we felt a relief, because my grandfather died before this happened. Now this sounds horrible to think, like, oh my god, how can you even think that about your grandfather in 9/11? But put it into perspective of how much of a nightmare it would have been for us. And it probably would have made the whole situation like 1,000 times worse if, my grandfather had seen 9/11. It was literally, dead flat honest, a weird form of relief. And again, it was a could have been worse situation. Grandpa could have seen it. And that's not... I know it doesn't sound like the nicest thing in the world, and it sounds completely thoughtless, completely mindless, but that was what we were thinking. And in a way, it's not that mindless when, you know, with the other stories to put it in perspective. Of course, then my mother died. This was years later. This is the most recent of the 3 deaths, obviously. My mother was the true matriarch of the family. When my grandmother died, she was the true matriarch. My grandfather would try to overturn her rulings, but she was the fucking matriarch. So this was a bit of a shake-up in the family, because we had 2 older sisters than myself. I have a sister-in-law and I have a sister. Both are viable candidates for the matriarchy of the family. No, there was no matriarchal war or anything. I'm just making a point here. This was the matriarch, my mother. We had all these plans put in place. You know, this was literally a big shake-up because nobody expected it. Her death was that sudden. I mean, yes, she had been struggling with cancer. She had gotten a relapse of a colon cancer she had in her liver, but she seemed to be recovering. She seemed to be on the road to another remission. You know, she seemed like she was going to be okay. And it just happened. She just died. And it was very sudden. It took days for it to sink in. This is the only funeral I ever cried at, and I cried on the very last day. But even then, we were able to talk about the good times, to joke, to say it could have been worse, at least she wasn't suffering, you know, that kind of thing. And right after was a bit of a nightmare that happened, you know, dealing with the house and all that shit, and my dad was like, oh, thank God, Phil, like, thank God my wife isn't here to see this. And that was how it was. I'll tell that story another time too, because that one was a barrel of laughs. But that was the perspective we have. And obviously my dad is from a different family, but again, he had that perspective too. I don't know if it's also from his side of the family or if he adopted. I think that it could have been worse comes from my dad's side, and the gallows humor comes more from my mother's side. But you get the idea. This is how we deal. This is how we cope. And I'll be honest, I'm using 9/11 as the biggest example because it's the one that the person who was bitching at me brought up, and it does actually serve as a good example. And I'll give another example. A friend of mine. He has autism a little more severely than I do. For him, the biggest tragedy of 9/11 wasn't the death. I mean, yes, it was a tragedy for him, but, you know, for him it wasn't the biggest. It was the buildings themselves. He's much older than me. He grew up when they were being built. He saw them being built. And as they were built, they became a source of comfort for him. For an autistic person, this is very important. This is something that they latch onto as a source of, you know, structure in their life. Like, nothing will change because of this. Like, even if everything else, you know, flip-flops and changes, this one thing will be steady, and it was gone. That was the worst thing for him. And again, you have to put this into the mindset of autism. For him, this was just a shattering nightmare. And you're calling me a mindless, daft person because I said it could have been worse? It sounds to me like you're not putting it into a perspective you can understand. I understand that you don't feel the same way I do. Or I could be totally off and this is just your way of picking a fight. However, you can't say I'm wrong for thinking that, because, you know, I'm not. I'm not saying there should have been more deaths. I'm saying it could have been worse. There should have been less deaths, to be perfectly flat, but, you know, I was saying it could have been worse. I was trying to be somewhat positive and rational about the whole thing, rather than, you know, getting weepy, moany, because I'll be dead flat honest. After a while, no matter what the tragedy, people get a little sick of the weepy and the moaning. A little positivity doesn't hurt. It's the sugar and the salt that makes the bitter medicine go down. If you were a fan of Good Eats like I was, you'll understand why I said that, especially the later season. That being said, I'll now get into the update, and I will post a link to the news article. It turns out, the bombing was done by 2 Chechnyan brothers, one of whom is now dead because he had an explosive device strapped to him and was probably threatening to blow it up while the police were there. Yeah, that's exactly what Boston needed, another bombing. Sarcasm aside, this was the older brother that got killed. The younger brother is still on the loose, and reading the article and reading some of his tweets, reading what the older brother says, I have a theory of their mentality. Not their motive, their mentality. I have no fucking clue what brought them to do this, and I don't think I ever will, until they actually catch the younger one and he says, or if they find his manifesto. I think the younger one was a sociopath, and I think the older one was depressed, and, you know, the younger found this as an easy thing to prey on. Why do I say this? Well, when they talked about the younger brother, they talked about how he was saying some very creepy things on Twitter, and his older one was saying how he had no friends in America. They had just gotten naturalized last year, so they were probably having trouble fitting in. You know, the younger one might have been having an easier time because he was described as charming, and, well, I don't think they said charming, but he was described as a wonderful kid. Oh boy, that's actually more of a red flag for me than this kid was a terror. I'm not fucking kidding about that. In articles like this, that does become, and I'll explain in a minute, become a red flag, and I'll explain in a minute, sorry. The older brother was probably depressed. He couldn't get, he was having trouble integrating, which is understandable. If you live in America and you're new to the place and you've only been here a year, it becomes a little tricky to integrate because we're kind of a weird culture in general. That being said, now I'll get into why I think the younger brother's a sociopath and what I mean by red flag. Sociopaths are very good at hiding the fact they're sociopaths. That's one of the traits. Sometimes you can spot them a little more easily. Usually sociopaths are usually the ones more in power. Like, I could argue that Donald Trump is a sociopath. I could argue many politicians are sociopathic. Sociopath doesn't mean dangerous, so, yeah. It actually doesn't, but in this case it did, because many serial killers are also sociopathic. Teachers are saying this was a wonderful kid, there was no sign of malice. This is ringing true. This is reminding me of articles about Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer, where they said he was a good person, he was charming, he was quiet, he didn't do anything wrong, he was a good neighbor, I wouldn't expect this from him. These are echoes of that to me. I could be totally wrong, but these are echoing that very heavily, and I just get this bad feeling this kid is a major sociopath, and he did not give 2 shits. Again, I hope they catch him alive, though. I am very anti-death penalty, and I'm actually kind of sad his brother had to die, but I do believe it was the police really did have no choice, because he had kind of a bomb strapped to him, and he had the detonator. And I'm sure his little brother was in the background whispering to him to set it off, and I don't think we needed 2 bombings this week. You know, speaking of, it could have been worse. That being said, the fact this kid is possibly a sociopath scares me a lot more than a terrorist. Because a terrorist, you get a whole group they claim, and you get the motive right off the bat, essentially, after a little while. Like, as soon as they figure out, oh, who did it, the terrorist will pop up and say, here's why we did it. You get the motive, you get the answers. A sociopath, you can't trust their answers. That's the problem, is you can't trust their answers, because sociopaths are very good at acting. You're never quite sure why they do something. So, even if this is a terrorist act, we don't know for what. And that's fucking terrifying to me. This is somebody who is just violent and doesn't care. For those of you who don't know, sociopathy means you don't quite have an empathy for other people. Some people would say autism has that too, but an autistic person can learn to understand the empathy. They have it, they just don't quite click it as well. At least I think that's how it works, because I am an empathetic person. I try to understand, at least. And I'm going to explain one more thing about myself now, because I forgot to do this. And sorry for making this disjointed. And yeah, obviously a sociopath doesn't have that at all. The empathy thing. So that's kind of why I'm a little worried about this. This is a strange glitch with me. I don't know if it's my autism or it's just my personality, but I mentioned the only funeral I ever cried at was my mother's. For some reason, bigger events like 9/11, like this, like a funeral of a family member even the death of a pet, are big enough that somehow, despite everything that happens, I can kind of wrap my head around it and figure it out and find the positive and move on. I somehow am better able to cope with that. I don't know if it's an understanding of I can't control this. I don't know if it's an understanding of nothing I can do about it except, you know, help out if I can, and that's it. I don't know if it's just a sense of this is a big thing and breaking down is not going to affect it either way, so why bother? But if something small happens, like flooding the kitchen, I've done this, and I felt terrible and I was crying. If something I do that is stupid and I feel like I'm going to get in trouble, essentially, happens, that's when I freak out and panic. That's when I cry. That's when it becomes too much, because I can't wrap my head around it. I keep thinking I'm in trouble, I screwed up, I fucked up, I could have done better. It is that. Same with anything else like that. You know, anything where I feel I could have done better, I could have not made a mistake. I will take my punishment. I will not argue with it. But I feel horrid when it happens. The other scary thing about that is if it's something I need to figure out or something I need to find, I actually think more clearly panicking. I don't know. I really don't know why. To this day, I don't know why the fuck my brain works that way. I'm not even sure if it's my autism. But this is the way I work. So it's not me being thoughtless and mindless when I say it could have been worse. It's because I can kind of wrap my head around it and see all the possibilities that could have happened, what did happen, how bad it could have been, how good it could have been. You know, the best case scenario with the bomb in place is the bomb was a dud and nothing happened, or the police spotted the bomb right away. And, you know, I don't expect the police or the FBI to spot things right away. I'm sorry, you know, they're human. I don't expect that. I never do. This is why I don't go out blaming the police, and I don't go around blaming, you know, gun control laws. In fact, in this case, somebody tried to blame gun control laws in the comments of the article I'm going to link. And somebody pointed out that, because this person also went on a spree and did, like, and shot 2 cops. They said, well, the people he shot had fucking guns. They were cops. That had nothing to do with the gun control laws, because the cops default had guns. He was just faster on the draw. So, you know, there was, you know, it was that kind of stupidity in the comments, and you can look at it yourself and just laugh at that stupidity. It was like, wow, dude. What? And even now I can find a positive that this kid had a very good uncle that understood. Like, this is a really good uncle, because he's saying, dude, you're making our family look bad. Turn yourself in now and you'll be alive. You know, I find these little things to latch onto that are good or interesting or funny, because it makes the whole situation a little easier to swallow. And it reminds me that the world isn't that bleak despite this one thing. It reminds me that the world doesn't fucking suck. And that's what I think is going on here, is that people, like, focus in on this one negative thing so much that it makes the rest of the world look horrible and dark, and that's not how it is. For every Boston bombing and 9/11 out there, there are people helping out. There are people laughing and playing. There are people going out partying and doing fine and not drunk driving. You know, there are people sitting here on YouTube making jokes. And that's why I focus on it could have been worse rather than it could have been better. Because I'm trying to be an optimist. I'm trying to see the glass as half full. Because if I see it as half empty, I'm not going to see a refill. I'm going to see a reason to give up. For me, the glass has to be half full. Because what else would it be? When the glass is empty, I'm dead. When the glass is full, I'm alive. Which do you think I'd rather be? I'll take half full, because it means I am alive. If I say half empty, then I'm half dead. I might as well go the whole hog. And if you don't like that, don't bother watching the rest of my videos, because this is the attitude I've grown in my 30 years of life. And since I'm still here, and I'm still doing quite well, and I'm married, and I'm actually a very happy person, yeah, I think it's working for me. What do you think? I'll catch you guys later. Bye! By the way, I am your export bomber, Lady Mage.